Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take the source material you send us, your articles, your research, your notes, and we try to cut right through all the noise. The goal, as always, is to leave you with the insights you actually need to really understand what's going on.
And our mission today is it's a pretty weighty one. We're doing a deep dive into something we've been calling the Durkin doctrine. And this whole concept, it's distilled from this extraordinary, almost mythical, and frankly deeply tragic history of a family, the Caretakers of Lorne Field.
Right.
So for you, the listener, what we're really looking at is this 300-year-old contract. We're looking at one man's sanity, and we're looking at an existential world-ending threat that basically nobody took seriously.
Until it was way, way too late.
Exactly. Until it was far too late.
Okay, so let's just jump right in and unpack that central conflict. We're focusing on a man named Jack Durkin. He's the current. And as we'll see as this all unfolds, he might just be the final caretaker.
He might be.
And he's operating under this commitment that embodies a really terrible paradox. It's, on the one hand, the most important job on the planet. I mean, it literally guarantees human existence. And yet, in the eyes of his community, his family, it's nothing. It's a joke. The most worthless labor you can imagine.
That contrast, I mean, it's everything here, isn't it? You've got this one man, Jack Durkin, who believes, and I mean absolutely believes, in his mission.
Completely.
There's this one quote that it perfectly captures how he sees himself. He says, I spend every goddamn day, from winter thaw to first frost, saving this worthless planet.
Wow. So he sees himself as a martyr, a savior for a world that maybe doesn't even deserve it.
A sentinel, right. But then you have his actual reality as the outside world sees it. His role is described as being widely mocked, as simply pulling weeds from a field nobody cares about. So this massive disconnect between the profound weight of his duty and the intense scorn he gets back, it's not just tragic.
No.
It's the structural weakness that the entire world is relying on.
And that's what makes this so compelling. Jack isn't delusional, and this is where it gets really, really interesting. The sources are crystal clear that the stakes he's fighting for they're just astonishingly cosmically high. These aren't just, some overgrown weeds that might give you an allergic reaction.
Not at all. And what's fascinating is the sheer level of detail, the technical behavioral detail that's provided about the threat itself. These things are described as highly dangerous parasitic root-like creatures. They're called Aukowies.
Aukowies.
And the description is, I mean, it's horrifying. They have these razor-sharp pincers that are capable of slicing clean through human fingers. And they are deceptively intelligent. These are not just mindless plants.
Deceptive is putting it mildly. The source notes that they emit this piercing, shrill sound. They literally scream every time you kill one.
Right. Think about that.
It's not just a noise, right? It's a psychological weapon. It's designed to grate on the caretaker's nerves day after day, week after week, for months and months.
And on top of that, they're masters of concealment. They're adept at playing possum when they're small and look totally benign.
So they're intelligent.
Their intelligence suggests they actually understand the system that's designed to contain them. The complexity of their behavior really speaks to this high level of determination. They're described as clever and relentless. They're constantly trying to find less obvious places to grow, always testing the boundaries of the field.
And they evolve.
They evolve. We see them trying to masquerade as common field daisies, but with their pincers turned inside out as camouflage. It's incredible.
So if they're this hard to manage when they're small, what's the ultimate threat? What's the clock that's counting down?
And that is the most terrifying part of the Durkin doctrine. The timeline is impossibly short. If you leave them undisturbed, the Aukowies mature in just 8 or 9 days.
A little over a week.
Just a week. And once they're mature, the sources are completely unambiguous. They become killing machines that would lay waste to every human, animal, bird, fish, and growth of vegetation on the planet. This is not a regional threat. It's an immediate global extinction event. And it's being prevented solely by one man pulling weeds.
So, okay, let's just lay this out for you, the listener. The setup is perfect. You have a lonely hero fighting an invisible, apocalyptic threat. He's bound by a sacred but completely outdated contract. And he's pitted against this corrosive skepticism from everyone around him, his wife, his sons, the local authorities who just see him as a burden.
And that forced isolation becomes the world's greatest vulnerability.
Exactly. The fate of civilization is resting entirely on the sanity and persistence of a man the town council probably wants to have committed.
It's the ultimate Cassandra complex, right? The truth teller who is cursed to never be believed. And that takes us directly into the rules that govern Jack's life for so long.
Let's get into the historical core of this doctrine, because we have to understand the rigidity of this commitment. The contract is the reason Jack Durkin can't just, you know, walk away, no matter how much his wife begs him or his own body is breaking down.
And this commitment, it goes back 9 generations of Durkins. We're talking almost 300 years since 1710.
9 generations.
It is an epic, multi-century burden that essentially just eliminates free will for anyone born into this caretaker lineage. The core duties in the contract are, they're brutal, they're exhaustive. Jack has to work every single day from the winter thaw to the first frost, 7 in the morning to 7 at night, doing nothing but weeding the Aukowies in Lorne Field.
So that's a 12-hour workday, 7 days a week for what, like 8 months of the year, year after year after year?
For his entire adult life, yeah.
And the level of dedication required is just staggering. We have this really grim anecdote that he kept this precise, non-negotiable schedule even when he was, quote, nearly dead with pneumonia, shivering out there in the field.
He understood. He knew that a single day missed was a step closer to global annihilation.
But that level of dedication, when the skeptical town looks at it, must have just fueled the rumors that he was, mentally unstable.
Oh, absolutely. The outside world sees fanaticism, Jack sees survival. Now, let's talk about what he gets in exchange for this life-consuming, world-saving work.
Right, the compensation.
He gets to live rent-free in the caretaker's cabin, and he gets an annual payment, which the contract calls an honorarium, of $8,000.
And this is such a critical point. It's almost a satirical element in the source material about, the economic decay of an essential public service. That $8,000 was written into the contract in 1869.
Yes. And we have to just pause and analyze that period for a second. In 1869, $8,000 was a massive sum of money.
A fortune.
A huge fortune. The source points out that the President of the United States at the time, Ulysses S. Grant, was only making $25,000 a year. So the caretaker's honorarium, it was designed to provide a comfortable, respectable, totally secure income for his family.
Enough to command reverence in the community.
Exactly.
Respect.
But time and inflation, they're cruel masters. That value proposition completely eroded over the next century and a half. By the time we get to Jack, he bitterly notes that $8,000 is, his word, squat. And he says he'd make twice that working at McDonald's.
And this is more than just a financial detail. It's a profound metaphor. The world is literally being saved by a function, the caretaker, whose economic and social value has just been allowed to completely collapse.
Right.
As the financial worth of the job plummeted, so did the social respect. This essential service, the literal preservation of life on Earth, was downgraded from a highly respected, well-funded position to a subsistence-level joke.
And the sources show how that lack of institutional support just accelerated the collapse of the community's regard for him. Historically, the caretaker was held in reverence. The town didn't just pay the honorarium, they actively supported the family with free services.
Right, free medical care, meat from the butcher, essential carpentry, plumbing. It was a whole societal commitment to keep the caretaker focused on the mission.
And that entire collective support structure just disintegrated. As the generations who either remembered the origins of the threat or, just adhered to the tradition, as they died off, the younger residents just stopped. They stopped being generous. The job became nothing more than a quaint tradition, or even worse, a civic joke that the town felt burdened to maintain.
His profound importance was just dismissed by a simple failure of institutional memory and community goodwill.
And this isolation, it poisons his family life most acutely, particularly when you look at it from the perspective of his wife, Lydia Durkin.
She married Jack knowing he was the caretaker. But she fundamentally believed the whole contract was foolishness. She rationalized his delusion because of the practical benefits.
Her motivations are really revealing. She's a person trapped by poor choices and, just crushing financial reality. She married Jack in 1979 because she was sick of being a waitress. The free housing plus the $8,000 salary, it seemed like a pretty good, reliable deal at the time.
She wasn't buying into the world-saving story.
Not at all. She was buying into stability.
But that stability just evaporated as inflation ate away at the honorarium. By the time the story takes place, she's described as worn out, poor, a chain smoker, and just consumed by guilt. Guilt about their poverty and the life she felt trapped in.
You have to acknowledge that. While her betrayal later on is shocking, she's reacting to decades of deep economic anxiety caused by the job's devaluation.
The extent of her resentment, though, is genuinely shocking. The sources detail how she actively tried to discourage Jack from his mission by by intentionally starving him. She believed that if he was weak enough, he'd finally give up the field and get a real job.
We're talking about serving him cornflakes for 23 straight days. This is a cruel form of psychological warfare against the man who is literally saving her life every single day.
She saw his mission as the source of their shame and their poverty, not the source of their existence. Her ultimate plan is just the final insult to the Durkin doctrine. She wants to revoke the contract entirely, evict Jack, and turn Lorne Field into a tourist attraction.
A profitable one. She sees the field as a gold mine. She even draws an analogy to Salem, Massachusetts for witch trials.
Wow.
She wants to profit off the perceived delusion, the very folklore that she believes ruined their life. It's a calculated almost. It's a capitalist betrayal of the caretaker's sacred duty.
And we also see this terrible burden placed on their sons, Lester and Bert, and this really sets up the future, or the lack thereof, for the doctrine.
Yeah, the contrast between the two boys is crucial for understanding Jack's inner turmoil. Lester is the eldest son, he's 17, and he is destined by the contract to be the next caretaker. But he is intensely resentful of his fate. He's called Weed Puller by his peers.
A deeply embarrassing name.
It summarizes his family's pariah status, and he dismisses the job as lame and only suitable for a retard.
And Jack is agonizingly aware of this. The sources note that he secretly doubts Lester has the proper material, the necessary dedication and belief to carry on the mission. He knows Lester isn't up to the task, which means eventually the world will end under Lester's watch.
But then you have Bert, the younger son, only 13, and he shows the exact qualities that are needed. He's conscientious, he's eager to learn, he has the right temperament for caretakers. Jack feels this deep, deep regret that their births weren't reversed, which highlights the tragic limitations placed on the family by this centuries-old rule that the eldest son must inherit the duty.
So the rules of the contract, which are supposed to protect the world, are themselves guaranteeing the doctrine's ultimate failure, just through poor succession planning.
It's a fatal flaw baked into the system from the very beginning.
We've established the intense pressure on Jack, both internal and external. Now let's really delve into the mechanics of the Aukowies and Jack's methodology, because this proves just how much specialization is required for the world to survive. Jack's work. It's less like manual labor and more like a highly specialized, dangerous surgery that he has to perform daily for 8 months straight.
That is absolutely the right way to look at it. It is a highly esoteric and dangerous scientific process. The sources detail the precise weeding technique. He can't just yank them out of the ground.
Right.
He has to find the perfect angle to pull out this thin, root-like thing that runs for a foot or so underground. The root is the life force. The stem is just the tip of the iceberg.
And the margin for error is basically non-existent. If he pulls incorrectly, what happens?
If he fails to get the root out cleanly, the remaining stem immediately lets out that rage-filled cry we talked about. The Aukowie comes back next time, tougher, thicker, more determined. Jack is engaged in this constant, low-grade evolutionary arms race where every single mistake he makes trains the enemy to be more resistant, more lethal.
He has to be so careful.
Intensely careful. Because given a chance, they will spring to life and cut one off.
And as we mentioned, this isn't a static war. We see the Aukowies actively adapting. They're constantly evolving, right? Like their sophisticated camouflage tactics, turning their pincers inside out to look like flowers.
And once they get to be about 2 feet tall, the danger just escalates geometrically. They can whip out at you like a rattlesnake, only much, much faster and with, precision cutting tools instead of fangs.
The required skill extends beyond just the physical. It goes into the psychological. Let's consider the perception of the scream. Jack hears that shrill death scream clearly every single time he kills one. But when he tries to train Lester, his skeptical, resentful son, Lester hears nothing.
And that's such a powerful narrative detail. If the next generation can't even perceive the evidence of the threat, how can they ever believe?
There's no way.
But Jack provides context for this. He explains that his own father told him it took him over a year of rigorous daily work to even start hearing the scream. This suggests the perception of the threat is, well, it's either linked to a profound psychological or sensory adaptation, a learned understanding needed for survival, or maybe it's tied to the very mental fortitude required of the caretaker, an almost spiritual connection to the field.
And Lester's resentment, his disbelief, it literally blocks his ability to perceive the enemy.
He dies.
So that learned perception and Jack's rigid adherence to the rules, it's immediately challenged by a really serious external human violation, the tomato incident. Lester, maybe in a moment of just desperate teenage rebellion or wanting to impress his friends, he invites them onto the field. This is a direct violation. The contract forbids unauthorized people, and, critically, it forbids food on the field. They decide to pelt Jack with tomatoes.
And the consequences are immediate and terrifying. It reveals just how delicate the balance Jack has been maintaining is. As soon as the tomatoes splatter, the Aukowies react. They immediately start sucking the juices out of the tomato remains. Jack realizes with absolute horror that feeding them makes them grow like crazy.
So this incident proves that external human malice, or even just simple vandalism, can catastrophically destabilize the entire system. The contract forbade food for a reason, because the Aukowies are parasitic and they draw strength from any available nourishment.
And the risk escalates immediately because of the extreme danger of human blood. Jack checks himself frantically for any injury, and he's profoundly relieved that the sticky stuff dripping down his face is tomato juice, not blood. The ancestral guide, the Book of Aukowies, it explicitly states that human blood drove Aukowies wild with desire and made them grow like crazy.
So the world came incredibly close to doom just because a few teenagers were bored and spiteful. Driven by this desperation, this knowledge that the Aukowies are growing stronger and the town's mockery is only getting worse, Jack tries to prove the threat is real. It's a misguided move. It is a direct, knowing violation of the contract's most fundamental protective guidelines. He purposely lets one Aukowie grow to almost a foot in height.
He violates the one rule that guarantees safety. Never let them mature. His plan is dangerous, but you can understand it. He borrows his neighbor Charlie Harper's camcorder. He intends to videotape the large Aukowie attacking him to show the town council. To finally, definitively, prove his job is legitimate and necessary. He chooses to break the contract to save his reputation and, he thinks, the institution itself.
And in doing so, he accelerates the crisis.
Immediately. The disaster strikes right away. The narrative description is just horrific. The foot-high Aukowie lashes out and it whips the spade right out of Jack's hand. Lester, startled and panicking, ignores his father's immediate warnings. He reaches down to grab the dropped camcorder,
Which landed right among a cluster of small 2-inch Aukowies.
the same ones that had been recently exposed to the tomato juice, making them unnaturally strong and hungry.
And the inevitable happens.
It does. An Aukowie, now fueled by human neglect and foreign nutrients, strikes. It chewed it off, as if it had been chewed up by a buzzsaw. The sources describe this horrifying visual of a pink spray, which indicates arterial blood loss.
Lydia rushes Lester, who's hemorrhaging, to the hospital in East Ab. The medical details solidify the horror, but they also raise immediate suspicion. The doctor notes the cut was perfectly clean. It suggests a knife or some kind of highly precise cutting tool, not a jagged plant. And that observation planted the seed of doubt that would later just destroy Jack's legal defense. Lester needs surgery, a transfusion.
And Jack, meanwhile, is pathologically paralyzed by his duty. He just keeps repeating, I have to go back, I have to finish weeding, even as his wife is speeding away with their bleeding son.
His devotion is so intense, so absolute, that to the outside world it looks pathologically insane.
Right. He cannot leave the field unweeded for even an hour, not even for his dying son. But what he's doing is adhering to the spirit of the contract. The world must survive. He is sacrificing his family for the safety of all of humanity.
The thumb incident immediately draws institutional attention. It brings in Sheriff Dan Wolcott. And what we see here isn't just simple skepticism. It's a profound institutional failure to process information that doesn't fit the existing, comfortable local narrative.
Wolcott's bias is evident from their very first interaction. He sees Jack not as a caretaker, but as an eccentric who's suffering from dementia. He dismisses the caretaker contract as nothing more than a relic, a fairy tale. He refuses to treat the initial tomato throwing as a serious violation of a sacred contract. Instead, he patronizingly suggests the teenagers could be punished by doing some of Jack's weeding.
Treating the Aukowies as a minor nuisance, not a world-ending threat. And then he decides to prove Jack wrong in the most direct, confident way possible. He really embodies the arrogant skepticism of the town. Wolcott goes to the field and he places his fingers right into a clump of 2-inch Aukowies, basically daring them to bite him.
And this non-action. This is maybe the most terrifying single moment in the entire story.
Okay.
Because it confirms the enemy's superior cognitive ability. They do not bite.
Yeah.
And Wolcott immediately interprets this as definitive, empirical proof that they are just weeds. Ugly, maybe, but harmless.
But Jack, the expert in the field, he sees the real, calculated truth. He sees the next layer of the Aukowies' psychological warfare. He realizes They knew they could cause me more trouble by not doing anything.
I mean, think about that implication for a second. These creatures deliberately resisted their natural blood-fueled urge to attack and feed. Why? Because they recognized that allowing Jack to be discredited, isolated, and arrested would leave the field unreaded. And that would guarantee their success in 8 or 9 days. This isn't just survival instinct. This is calculated cognitive warfare aimed specifically at undermining Jack's credibility.
The Aukowies are smarter than the entire town council.
By a mile.
And while Jack is reeling from this realization, and while Lester is still in surgery, his wife Lydia launches her final calculated betrayal. We know she had already taken the videotape out of the camcorder. She made sure Jack could never present the proof that he broke the contract to obtain.
And she immediately calls Paul Minter, the lawyer who's planning the theme park development. She promises Minter that Jack will not show any videotapes to the media, locking in the narrative that Jack is the dangerous one. When she confronts Jack back at the house, her desperation takes this darker, unforgivable turn. She forces Jack to agree to Minter's plan, threatening him with arsenic in his food if she thought for 1 second he had intentionally hurt Lester to prove a point.
This is the culmination of her resentment. She is willing to risk Jack's death to achieve the financial security and respectable life she craves, and it's all predicated on the idea that Jack is either a liar or a maniac.
But the truly devastating pivot in the narrative, the one that seals Jack's fate institutionally, it comes from his own son. The narrative shifts completely because of Lester's testimony. The 17-year-old, driven by rebellion, by the shame of being called weed puller, and this profound resentment toward his father. He tells the police, and later submits a sworn statement, that Jack tackled him and intentionally cut off his thumb just to prove the Aukowies were real.
And that lie, it just destroys Jack's ability to maintain the contract. He's arrested for felony assault. Thankfully, his defense is handled by Hank Thompson, who's a decent public defender. And he, along with the judge, Judge Harris, they secretly show respect and even some belief in the caretaker role. They know the town's history.
And Hank warns Jack that the town council is planning on keeping him locked up overnight, just to make a big show of the hearing, which would potentially leave the field unweeded for a critical period of time.
So this places Jack in an impossible, world-ending ethical dilemma. If he tells the truth, that the Aukowies are real, that he broke the contract by letting one grow, that Lester was in violation, he's convicted, he's jailed, and the world ends in a matter of days.
So, to avoid jail time, which would leave the field unweeded and guarantee global doom, Jack does the only thing that can save the world in the short term. He lies in court.
He claims he was simply pulling out weeds every day, conforming to the town's preferred delusion. And he says the town council were saps for paying you to do that.
And this blatant, desperate lie, it saves the world in the short term by getting him immediately released. But it simultaneously hands the town council the perfect legal justification they needed to finally sever the contract.
The downfall just deepens immediately after that. The town council, citing Jack's own sworn testimony that he was simply pulling out weeds, and Lydia's departure, which they interpret as a result of domestic abuse, noting her swollen hand from a fight, they revoke the contract entirely. They seize the house, they dump his belongings on the lawn.
The irony is just devastating. Jack violated the letter of the contract by telling a lie that discredited his very purpose. But the lie was necessary to adhere to the spirit of the contract, which was keeping the field weeded. The consequence of the lie is the loss of the contract and the loss of his home.
And on top of that, Lester's statement about the assault leads Child Services to remove both Lester and Bert and place them in a foster home. So Jack is now homeless, alienated, stripped of his livelihood, and he's forced to camp near the field to continue his secret work, the only thing standing between humanity and oblivion.
The cascading tragedies that follow Jack's eviction and his institutional condemnation are they're devastating. He's lost his home, his reputation, his freedom, yet he's still there, tenting near the field, weeding covertly. And then 2 weeks after Child Services placed the boys in foster care, the tragedy of Bert's death occurs.
This is the emotional, crushing blow that fundamentally alters Jack's perspective and his commitment. Bert, the one son with the right temperament for caretaker, the one who secretly believed Jack and was eager to learn, he's killed in a bike accident, hit by a truck.
And Jack's grief is compounded by the knowledge that the only potential successor with the necessary spirit is now gone. He realizes he now has to continue the job for 8 more years, until Bert, the child he regretted not being the eldest, would have been old enough to legally inherit the contract.
He had hoped for better things for Bert than the caretaker's burden, but now that option is just brutally taken away. The burden of saving the world is now confirmed to rest on his shoulders alone for the next decade.
And then he loses his only remaining ally, the one person with any institutional power who actually believed in him, Hank Thompson, the public defender.
Right.
Hank had been quietly providing Jack with groceries and money, showing this true, quiet belief in the mission. He even told Jack a story about watching Jack's grandpa weeding, cementing that connection to the long tradition.
But Hank suddenly dies from a massive coronary, and the loss is total. Hank's wife, Jeanette, she turns her grief and anger directly onto Jack. She tells him that Hank died in no small part due to the agitation your hysteria caused him.
And then she refuses to return the sacred texts, the caretaker's contract, and the original book of Aukowies, claiming they never existed in the first place.
So he's now completely cut off. He's divorced from his home, his family, his only legal advocate, and his entire recorded history. He has nothing left but the field, his failing body, and the looming deadline of the first frost.
And Jack's physical and mental state just deteriorates rapidly in the weeks leading up to the climax. We need to pause on this because it builds the necessary pathos for his desperate final action. He's camping outside, he's exhausted, severely dehydrated, malnourished, and constantly shivering from fever.
And crucially, he sustained a severely broken ankle while he was fleeing his seized house earlier. He's unable to afford aspirin or even pull off his heavy, waterlogged work boot. The doctor later notes this detail. The inability to remove the boot is what led to the swift development of gangrene. He is fighting the apocalypse while actively rotting from the inside out.
He realizes the horrific, unavoidable truth. He cannot possibly keep weeding the field for the remaining week or so until the first frost in his physical condition. The world is going to end. Not because of the Aukowies' intelligence, but because the caretaker is medically incapacitated and completely alone.
And this is when he makes his desperate choice. In a moment of absolute clarity, mixed with the delirium of fever and grief over Bert, he buys a machete from Jerry Hallwell, a local hardware store owner.
And the town's prejudice is just relentless, even in this moment. Hallwell confronts him immediately, asking, "What for, so you can cut off my thumb like you did your son's?"
Jack is fully aware that he is now viewed as a monster and a danger, even as he prepares for a final catastrophic act of world saving. He knows his final act will confirm his institutional insanity, but he doesn't care. The world is the priority.
And this brings us to the deadly confrontation with Sheriff Wolcott. Wolcott finds Jack near the field, which has already been cleared by construction equipment for a luxury subdivision, a final, bureaucratic, and deeply ironic indignity to the sacred ground. Wolcott is genuinely worried about Jack's health, but remains completely convinced the Aukowies are just weeds.
So Jack attempts one last desperate proof. He tries to lure Wolcott into the 5-inch-tall Aukowies, believing the creatures, desperate for food, will finally lash out. But the Aukowies, the clever creatures who learn to play possum to cause Jack institutional trouble, they stay absolutely still, silent, harmless.
That silence is the trigger. Jack, driven by despair, consumed by grief over Bert, and furious at the world's willful blindness, realizes the only way to save the world is to destroy the field, regardless of the consequences to himself.
He initiates the final, massive contract violation, Wolcott's murder and the field's inferno. He quickly soaks a blanket strip in oil, pushes it into Wolcott's Jeep's fuel tank via the dipstick, lights it, and drives the Jeep into the growing field of 5-inch Aukowies.
The Jeep explodes, killing Wolcott and thousands upon thousands of Aukowies. And Jack hears them screaming, not the single shrill cry, but a piercing, unified shriek of thousands dying at once. The fire shoots 50 feet high, an unnatural, highly toxic, bluish-reddish flame. The color and intensity suggest the parasitic, petroleum-like nature of the Aukowies, confirming their unnatural origin and deep energy density.
The aftermath is grim, and it raises unanswerable questions for the investigation. The police find Wolcott's severed foot, still in the boot, in the woods. Detective Stone notes immediately there was no blood on the machete found nearby, which contradicts the assumption that Jack had used it to hack up the sheriff.
And Jack, even in his fevered state, insists on the truth. The Aukowies chewed off Wolcott's body in their frenzy. This explains the lack of blood on the machete and the missing torso. The Aukowies, suddenly encountering a massive source of human blood and fueled by fire-induced rage, would have grown wild with desire and consumed the body in minutes, leaving only the foot flung away during the initial attack. It's a grotesque confirmation of his life's mission, delivered far too late.
So Jack is immediately arrested and hospitalized, and his physical condition, now that it's finally being treated, confirms the extent of his dedication and his suffering. The doctor notes Jack is severely dehydrated, malnourished, has a high fever, and the worst case of gangrene he's ever seen. His foot has to be amputated immediately.
And the legal reality is absurd, yet entirely inevitable. The prosecutor offers him a deal manslaughter, 10 years. But Jack refuses. He sticks to the absolute truth, even if it guarantees his conviction. There ain't nobody, the Aukowies thought of that. His public defender, Bert Goldman, is this young attorney facing an impossible defense. A client who is lucid, yet utterly convinced of a fantasy.
Goldman is forced to argue temporary insanity as Jack just insists, I know what I saw and I ain't crazy. The state psychiatrist, meanwhile, leans toward a theory of collective brainwashing and psychotic delusions surrounding the Durkin family history.
The psychiatrist argues that Jack only killed Wolcott to erase self-doubts he may have been having about the true nature of those weeds. So in the court's eyes, Wolcott's non-action in the field earlier was the trigger for Jack's breakdown, not proof of the Aukowies' intelligence. The institutional narrative is fiercely committed to protecting the consensus reality.
But the irony is just so deeply layered in Lydia's success, which is unfolding at the exact same time. She visits him in jail, completely reconciled with Lester, and is now thriving financially. She has an apartment, and she's writing a best-selling book, The Caretaker's Wife, capitalizing entirely on Jack's notoriety and perceived madness.
She gets interviewed on Oprah and Letterman, selling the story of the crazy weed puller who held her family hostage. She achieves the financial security she always wanted, but only by exploiting the man who sacrificed everything to save her.
And Jack notes the bitter truth of his situation. He's praying for his own madness. It's this profound statement of existential surrender. He says, I am praying every day that I'm insane. It's the only chance the world has.
Think about that. If he's sane, the Aukowies are real and the world is doomed because the field is now unweeded and unprotected. If he's insane, he's just a murderer, but the world is safe from a threat that doesn't exist.
The trial is set for April 10th, 2 weeks after the spring thaw, and Jack is terrified that the Aukowies will have matured. Goldman, his public defender, dutifully visits the field daily after the thaw, and he reports back to Jack. Nothing's growing. The field is desolate, scorched, and quiet.
Jack cannot accept this quiet.
Yeah.
Based on the Book of Aukowies and 3 centuries of history, he knows the creatures could not have been killed so easily by fire. He worries that his continuous series of contract violations, letting one grow, leaving the field, the lies in court, and finally burning them alive, that this was the final straw that somehow altered the rules of their existence and the terms of the caretaker doctrine.
Did he accidentally unleash a new, faster-maturing, fire-resistant breed?
That's his fear. And Goldman struggles desperately with the physical evidence that defines the insanity plea. He keeps coming back to the fact that the machete had no blood. And he cannot fathom how a man could cleanly sever a foot through bone and a leather boot in one stroke, as the doctor observed. The absence of Wolcott's body, despite Jack's insistence that the Aukowies ate it, leaves the defense lawyer just unable to accept the mundane solution of temporary insanity. The whole case hangs on a mystery that only Jack and the Aukowies can explain.
And this brings us to the terrifying final scene, the climax where the truth, stripped of all human interpretation or delusion, just bursts into the courtroom.
On the 4th day of the trial, just as Goldman is struggling with his closing arguments, this cacophony of screams and an incredibly loud, unnaturally amplified bug zapper popping noise suddenly fills the courtroom. It silences everyone. And that popping noise, that's the sound of the rapidly maturing Aukowies striking their first victims.
People rush to the windows and start screaming themselves, witnessing the destruction that's happening outside. Jack, chained to his wheelchair, freshly amputated, covered in a moist spray, implied to be blood or some residual Aukowie fluid, is the only one who sits perfectly still.
And in that moment, he realizes the terrifying, complete truth. The Aukowies survived the fire. They matured rapidly in the unweeded, unguarded field. And they were no longer playing by the rules of the contract. Or perhaps the fire had released them from the field entirely. The ultimate institutional failure, the revoking of the contract, had accelerated the end of human existence.
In his final, lucid moment of realization, he begs forgiveness from his family and from God for the terrible burden that was placed on him. The deep dive into the Durkin doctrine ends not with relief, but with the screeching, apocalyptic confirmation that one man's dedicated paranoia, dismissed by the entire world, was the only thin barrier against annihilation.
The story of Jack Durkin and Lorne Field is, it's just devastating. And it's a powerful exploration of thematic threads that really echo in our own world. It highlights the devastating consequence of institutional disbelief and the complete isolation of the person responsible for a civilization-level threat.
The core lesson here is the devastating cost of intellectual arrogance and skepticism. Sheriff Wolcott dismissed the contract as a quaint tradition. He prioritized the comfortable narrative of eccentric weed puller over the uncomfortable truth of world protector. His death and the subsequent global destruction is the direct result of an institutional failure to recognize evidence that aggressively challenged their viewpoint. And it also demonstrates the difficulty of proving existential threats when the evidence is so easily dismissed. Or, even worse, when the threat itself is intelligent enough to camouflage its presence for maximum institutional damage. When Jack says Aukowies bit off his son's thumb, it's instantly categorized as psychotic delusion or group hysteria by the town council and the state psychiatrist. The field was seen as barren, yet the threat was hiding in plain sight, calculating its moves, and just waiting for the caretaker to be removed.
And finally, the terrifying power of a system that, once it's violated, turns against its protectors. Jack spent his life meticulously adhering to the rules, but his desperate actions, the proof attempt, the lying in court, the burning, they accelerated the Aukowies timeline, leading to the final collapse of reality for everyone. The very mechanisms Jack used to try and save his job are the ones that ultimately ensured the world's end. So here's a final provocative thought for you to consider, and it ties back to Jack's impossible ethical dilemma. The entire narrative turns on the fact that Jack, in his desperate attempt to save the world, violated his contract by lying in court to secure his immediate release. That lie was what led the town to revoke the contract and ultimately doom the world.
But if Jack had accepted jail time for the alleged assault, leaving the field unweeded, the Aukowies would have matured and ended the world in days anyway. There was no good option. So we ask you, the listener, to consider the weight of this doctrine. If you knew that your freedom, your reputation, and your life depended on maintaining a lie, but that lie was the only thing standing between the world and certain doom, what choice would you have made?